years now, and I've had a few startup companies working in cloud areas like GPS and remote controls. The first programmable remote controls. I did those just because I wanted to. I love little startups with a few people talking about ideas. Now I like to meet with even high school kids or just out of high school talking about ideas of where to build something. And usually what they're missing, there's so many people now that want to be an entrepreneur and start a company, and they have ideas, but they don't have the engineering and the product done. We were lucky when we started Apple, we had the whole thing.
Oh, hi. Thank you so much for coming today. Um, my question is, what is the joke today?
What's the joke today?
What's your favorite joke? Or
The joke? Oh, let's see. I tend to make up jokes when they come to me. One came to me earlier today, and I can't remember what it was. I said it. Sorry, I played a prank. I told you the prank that I played on my assistant. I mean, I played it on actually the engineering professors here. They think that she walked out of her appendectomy today. So, that'll... What? Ask Kathy? My comedian friend. You're going to be seeing an awful lot of me in next year's My Life on the D-List reality TV show. Emmy award-winning show. An awful lot. I take her to Bob's Big Boy in Burbank and donate computers to schools in Mexico. We do an awful lot together, yeah. And some big surprises, but I can't say everything. Yeah, she's real smart, real smart.
Hi, very, very simple question. Why name your company Apple?
That question comes up all the time. Why are we named Apple? I remember picking Steve Jobs up at the airport in San Francisco when he flew back from Portland, and we're driving down. He says, I got a great name for the company, Apple Computer. And right away, the biggest record company in the world, one of the biggest names that was known to young people our age, was Apple Records for the Beatles. I said, what about Apple Records? And he said, well, they're a record company, we're a computer company. And I said, that's all it takes? And he said, yeah, so I trusted, okay. We both tried to think up strong technical names. Steve himself did. You know, in the car, we would try to think up better names, but nothing would ever beat Apple. Now, when we raised the big money to really start as a real company with the Apple II, we hired a PR agency. The agency came and told us the name Apple has to go because it doesn't symbolize, it doesn't speak of power, of computing a lot, of doing a lot of stuff. And Steve and I just held our ground. We said, no, computers are now coming to the homes. They're coming to a new class of people. And an apple is a good symbol in the home. And an apple a day keeps the doctor away. And an apple for the teacher. And apples are fruit, and they're healthy, and they're a great symbol. So we hung on to it, and then we got the PR agency, went into designing logos that we selected. So it was, back in those days, there was no big money in this business either. So when there's no big money, any name's okay. If it sounds interesting, that's a good enough reason.
Yeah, not to open a can of worms, but why did Microsoft become who they are, and when are they going to go away?
Well, alrighty. We'll have one more question after this one, but Microsoft, well, as I mentioned, Bill Gates actually started out as a brilliant programmer, but instantly went into being a businessman, buying something here, selling it for more there with, subscriptions and making a lot of money off that. There was a point in time with our Apple II where we dealt with Microsoft to write some application software for us and a floating point basic for us. And they were very cooperative, and they were much smaller than Apple. We didn't think that much of them at the time. But the world was changing to where software was going to be more important. And you could buy those Intel machines everywhere in the world. Every manufacturer made Intel machines, and only one manufacturer made the Apple II. And so we lost a huge amount of market share due to that. We kept our prices high, and it could have been a mistake, but it could have been the right thing to do. And how can you go back and try to point a finger and say it was right or it was wrong? Microsoft became very big, but they were trying to give the world new tools that it didn't have, computing tools. A lot of people get their best out of it. I mean, when I think of what's the worst thing about Microsoft stuff, well, a lot of people fall in love with Apple stuff. And, if you want to be passionate about the machine you own, like a car, or if you want to feel special, you're probably a Macintosh person. A lot of left-brain industries, though, are forced into a PC. You can only get a lot of software for accounting on a PC, for lawyers, legal on a PC, and for engineering, a lot lot of the software is only on a PC. So that kind of directs you. But your own personal choice, we feel if we keep making good products, people will learn and find out. And of course, I do worry about spam. And like I saw the Slashdot thing last week where somebody was suggesting that if your computer is sending spam because it got taken over by some spammer and it's a zombie, well then you should be taken offline until you can get a certificate, prove yourself, take a test or something that you can manage the operating system you own, because it's all Windows machines, millions of them that the spammers control. One last question.
Okay, I had two questions. One's real quick. I saw on your wrist, what do you have there? Is it a Nixie tube watch?
It's a Nixie tube watch that uses 140 volts on the Nixie tubes, and when I turn my wrist, it shows hours and minutes at the rate I would speak it, and my head loves to read it that way. I actually love it as a watch. Not because it's a geek watch, but I'll wear a geek watch for 1 week, and then I'll go back to my pretty hands watch, but this one, I actually like the way it tells time. And I saw somebody wearing one. I looked it up on Google, Nixie tube watch. I found it. I got serial number 14, handmade in America. I like to tell people.
Wow. My other question was, I know with the iPod and the iPhone, there's been a lot of, like, a sort of battle between people who want to modify the system and Apple, like, trying to prevent that, trying to make it into a paid system. What's your opinion on that?
Well, I haven't seen that huge a battle. I'm sorry it exists. I think it should be open. What made the Apple II so successful in the early days, it was an incredibly open machine. We published every schematic and listing and information on how to make your own cards to plug in, how to write your drivers on them, how to add devices, how to write software in many languages. And all these companies, thousands of companies sprung up from little people that never in their life would have a chance to have their own company. Some of them were in high school. And they started writing programs or designing little pieces of hardware, selling it for the Apple II. And it was such a huge market to see the number of just really young and small people that had a chance now to be something in the world. It was an incredible time. And it gets closed down when a company has a product that's not very open. I hope that Apple's SDK leads to a lot more of these, young startups, finding a way to make some nice piece of software for the iPhone. And we can get away from, I hope that they're adequate enough for the masses, that we don't even need the hacking. And I can understand some reasons why you'd have to close up a new product, but I can't understand why you wouldn't let me put a ringtone into my iPhone. I'm not going to destroy the world, or why I can't have stereo Bluetooth. There's some things that, I just as an engineer, it's just, I'm sorry, it doesn't equate. So, good luck with all your products. I love mine.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I welcome to the second of late unexpected presentation by the Institute. We are honored to have with us today Steve Jobs, the President and Chief Executive Officer of Next Computer Corporation.
Lead me, but he'd be there to help me when I was inspired in that way. And I had in our neighborhood, Silicon Valley was called Santa Clara Valley back then, and it was full of fruit trees. One of the largest fruit-producing areas of the world, actually. And so our little neighborhood of houses, these beautiful new type of homes called Eifflers with amazing architecture, middle class could live in there. And we have a little outpost of houses, but if you rode your bike north, south, east, or west, you were in orchards. You know, they build a brand new school because everything was new in Silicon Valley, and it wasn't Silicon Valley yet. And you'd ride your bike through an orchard to get to this brand new school. A lot of parents were moving in to work for the company Lockheed. That was the big company in Sunnyvale. And my father worked for Lockheed as an engineer. And in doing that, he also had to build very tiny, lightweight parts for things like submarine missiles and guidance systems. Well, he was in close contact with the people of the early transistor companies in the area, Raytheon and other companies, and Fairchild, and so he was on the leading edge of transistors, miniaturization, and chips and all that. I kind of found out that I was a genius in third grade because, well, my mom did some math flashcards with me one night, and when I went to school, the teacher pulled out some flashcards for us, and I was the only boy that could beat the girls. So I knew I was a genius. Well, it's funny though. You know, I started thinking that day, I thought, hey, I'm good at math. I've never thought I was good at anything before. And when you start thinking you're good at something, there's a self-fulfilling prophecy. You tend to perform better. That becomes more important to you to study, and you kind of become good in that area. So I had a real lucky accident. Got me started thinking I'm good at math, and I became good at math. My dad gave me a lot of influential discussions about how education was so important to my future and to the world, and that made young people important, because he almost said it, the way I remember it being young was the adults had a pretty messed up, screwed up world with wars and things like that, but we were going to school to study them all, study things and make them better, and make the world better. And it really makes you feel good when you're a child being told that, you know, your future is to do things better than we did it. One year I got a transistor radio in about maybe fifth or sixth grade, a little product from Japan, little blue radio, and for years I slept with the radio on next to my head on the bed all night long, listening to music. And I thought, wow, I went to my dad, and he was working with transistors in these military projects, and I said, wow, you know, look at these transistor radios. Isn't that cool that now they're making transistors so people can have small radios? And he said, well, that's not really why they're making transistors. They're making transistors for the military. And once they have it for the military, some of it kind of finds its way into products that we use in our own home and our own lives, like transistor radios. And I was disappointed. And to this day, I always go back to that conversation and think, I remember in my head just an internal decision that I wanted someday for products to be made for people that live a life in a home, to have a better home. Science fairs in early school years were very important too. I got steered into, you know, like the other electronic kids. So we had a block full of a lot of parents that were engineers, new parents, a lot of young kids. We had a lot of kids in our neighborhood, and a lot of them liked electronics. Could buy parts at Sunnyvale Electronics and solder them together and make little oscillators and flashers and house-to-house intercoms. But in the science fairs, I stumbled into, and it was partly accidental, some nice little projects, you know. And by fifth grade, built a big, huge project with 92 lights and 92 switches for the electrons of an atom. And those switches had to be wired with some reasoning that every single switch turned on more and more lights, and the next one turned some of them off and turned others on because electron orbits change around. And I had to learn about diodes, a smart device, something that knew to send electricity one direction, but don't send it back the other way through the other lights. And that was some sort of a first learning step. Most of learning goes step by step. If you know something really well and you try to teach a young kid that point, but it's above his cognitive development, step by step, they don't learn it. You have to go, as a teacher, you have to go in short, small, appropriate steps. And I was lucky. Okay, so I saw a diode, and I learned one little element of electronics, one little part and how it worked. By sixth grade, I embarked on a huge project. My dad, because of his real good connections with the transistor companies, got hundreds of diodes and transistors given to us as cosmetic rejects from local companies. And we had a lot of those. And I learned about logic gates. I actually accidentally stumbled on a book that my dad had, or not a book, it's a journal for engineers. They didn't have magazines covering computers in electronics or anything back then. They had ham radio, they had electronics, but they didn't have computers. So only certain engineers would have these kind of journals, and I opened it up. a few of the articles I could understand. Articles on big, huge computers with vacuum tubes and thousands of them, and how many calculations per second they could do. And other articles one was about a big, huge CRT, and the dots on the CRT were memory. They could be written and turned on, they could be read, and then they could be refreshed. And it was like the memory was a huge CRT display, like a TV set. What a fascinating article to read. And then when I was that young, about 8 years old maybe, and then I read an article about logic gates. Something that can make a decision if two inputs are both ones, the output's a one. Otherwise, the output's a zero. And learned about AND gates and OR gates and algebra that can switch one into the other, Boolean algebra, and I loved it. And you know what? As a fifth grader, you didn't need high-level math. You didn't need to know matrix multiplications and math analysis, and you didn't need to know any calculus. Anybody that kind of knew addition and counting could pretty much understand logic. It wasn't that hard. Why was it such an obscure thing that almost nobody in the world worked on this stuff? But I was so lucky to stumble onto it in this magazine, Fall in Love, this journal. Well, now tic-tac-toe is a game of logic. If certain squares are taken with X's, you know where to put your O. You can make a logical set of rules. And that fit this whole concept of logic gates. A logic gate could have inputs for square 1 and 2 and 5. If they're all taken, then my move is going to be square 7. Real simple logic. Piece of plywood. Soldered transistors and diodes and resistors, building up gates and gates and more gates and gates. Decision gates, and built a tic-tac-toe machine that was just huge and immense. Part of making these very large science fair projects is you put yourself into building a long project that's not over in a day or two. So, and that's a real good thing to understand when you're trying to build something significant someday in electronics, to go through that step. Also, I was, way ahead of my time. I mean, computers weren't even in colleges at this point in time, around 1960. Now, in 8th grade, I took a science fair another step further. I took hundreds of these little transistors and put them on a little board, a little tighter, and made binary adder. Binary is the mathematics of computers. Switches can have two positions, 0 and 1, up and down, high voltage, low voltage. So I made 12 switches in a row, or 10 switches in a row, that you could toggle in a number, like 100111100. It's a binary number, and it equals 89 in decimal. And you could toggle another number in, up, down, 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 and that number is equal to 100 in decimal, and you add them together, and a bunch of lights come on. And you look at those lights, 1, 0, 0, 1, they're on or off, on or off, on or off. And the answer is 189 if you look at a chart or you do some figuring. Pretty slow and awkward, but isn't it neat that for the first time in history you could ever imagine building a device that can actually calculate like this? So I built this thing for a science fair, and it was so neat. I won all sorts of awards, got the first airplane trip of my life. The Air Force gave me the award for the top electronics project in the whole Bay Area Science Fair. And I was in 8th grade, and the science fair covered up through 12th grade. So I was one of those early starting electronic whizzes and geeks and all that. It was around that point in time, too, in junior high school, where kids start to socialize a lot. And pretty much, I kind of, dropped out of that sphere. I was sort of a math genius and a technical people, so they didn't talk to me as much as, normal people are in the same way. And I didn't know it. Now, I was on this little course, working my way up the stairway to finding out what is a computer. Somehow I wanted to know what computers were, but I was way too shy to ask or to deliberately try to find something that described what is a computer. I wanted to stumble into answers on my own. So far, I've come across learning how diodes work to stop electricity going one way, how to put diodes and transistors together to make a gate, how to put a bunch of gates together to make an adder. I'd even figured out how to take an adder and subtractor and put in a few more gates of my own and make it one circuit that does both. I'd even solved some circuit problems that resistors didn't work there. You need diodes. And so I was working my way closer, but I still didn't know for sure what a computer was. I knew it was a magical word. In 9th grade, I went to a science fair, not with my own project, but just to go. And there was a project, and it had a bunch of switches that would select operations, like move a number into a certain set of storage registers, or add two storage registers together, or put those two storage registers in some other storage register. And it had a motor, stepping motor. And the motor would go choop, and some lights would flash, and the first set of switches, that instruction would get executed, whatever they said to do. And then the motor would go ding, and number 2 would happen. Motor goes to 3, 4, 5, and every once in a while it could make a decision if the number was positive or negative, for example, and the motor would reverse and go back up to the top. So I learned, that was where I learned, a computer does one thing after another, after another, after another, in order. Okay, that is cool. So I can design some logic circuits that do one thing, and then they decide to do something else, and something else, and something else again. I was getting closer to, in my head, to what a computer was. And that whole period took years. So it was slow development. I was doing lots of other kid things, in the neighborhood. We had a lot of fun. We ran a house-to-house intercom once. We started, putting in microphones and buzzers and speakers, and we ran wires down to the end of the block to Bill Werner's house, and over the light poles, throwing it over like a bolo kind of. We got it across the street to Greg Angel's house, and we ran it all the way up the fence, stapling. I don't know how we got away with stapling these wires in. They were into a fence, a wooden fence, all the way up the block to Stephen Delator's house and over to Bill Fernandez's house halfway up. And that was kind of a really neat project. I remember it meant so much to take ultimate care and draw the straightest lines I could with colored pencils and just draw such perfect diagrams of my designs and what they would look like and all that. So that was a big deal to us. Well, at one point, the house-to-house intercom stopped working. And so we walked along the fence, and there at one of the houses, this guy had cut the wire in about 20 places. And to kids, you just sort of think, it's a fence, I'm just running a wire on a fence, and you don't realize there's all sorts of properties, people own properties. So we redid the wire on the other side of the fence. So we learned about property rights a little, and another good experience. Just building your own little projects like that. House intercom. I went out to the backyard once where the wire came in, and I went out and hooked up a speaker, and I was going to hook a Morse code key because I knew Morse code from being a ham radio operator, and so did my friend up the block had taken the same class. He wasn't a ham, but we were going to send Morse code to each other, and all of a sudden I heard him talking. I listened to the speaker real close, and he was talking. I said, "Hey, Steve, you hear me?" Stephen Delator. And he's, "Hey, we can talk." What a surprise. A speaker can be a microphone. One of the neatest ways of learning is when you just learn it on your own and you don't have to read it in a book. So in junior high school, those of us that grew up electronic tend to like to play a lot of little pranks. First of all, we know this mystery of the world that people who don't know electronics don't know. And if something doesn't work, they don't know why, and it might be totally obvious to an electronics person. Or if something sparks a little, or shocks you. We know what it's all about. Well, so we have all these energies in us, like normal people, to socialize, but sometimes we aren't the talkative ones. We're the quiet ones, real independent, quiet, studying our room, doing our own little things, only talking to our techie friends. And those energies have to come out. Those energies that don't have a way out in parties and making up little small talk and stories and learn how to talk like young kids do. And so the energies often come out as pranks. Not trying to destroy things or hurt, but just trying to play tricks. I don't know why. Psychologists study this and say it happens. So sure, I played a lot of pranks in school. In junior high school, I got caught a lot. I got caught for a lot of things. And they didn't let you get away with anything. One time, we figured out that you could make a little hole in a pencil and take a paper clip in it and wrap a rubber band. You put a spit wad on it, and it fires the spit wad, pop, and it hits the blackboard. The teacher doesn't know who did it because you didn't have to move your hand. You just let the spit wad shooter shoot it. We used to love those, and one of the guys in our class drafted out a neat drawing of a gun made out of metal or something. It had a firecracker at one end and a pin inside of it, and it'll shoot the pin. Pin gun. And this phrase has got going around the school that there were pin guns, and somehow I got associated with the pin gun. That didn't exist. And one day I got called out of class, and the vice principal brought me into his office, and he had these 3 little devices on his desk. He said, "Steve, we searched your locker and we found these pin guns there." I looked down and I told the vice principal, I said, "Those aren't pin guns, those are spit wad shooters." for a very long time in my life, that was one of the best lines I ever stumbled into. The truth is better than fiction very often. You can't make up some good stories. So in high school, I've been caught so many times in junior high. So we got to high school.